It's been 20 years to the day when the then-Louisville Board of Aldermen passed a landmark legislation in Kentucky granting protections to the LGBTQ community. Dennis Ting talked with some of the people who were there pushing for the legislation about how far the community has come since, but what else needs to be done. Dennis.
Well, that's right. The Fairness Ordinance may have passed 20 years ago, but the push for a civil rights ordinance in Louisville to protect the LGBTQ community began almost a decade earlier. As one woman who had been part of that push told me tonight, we had a lot of fun times, but there was a lot of pain and suffering along the way, too.
Look at these folks. These are history makers.
History turning 20 years old.
And they're quite young, I might add, as well.
On January 26th, 1999, our community took a bold and historic step for LGBTQ rights.
That step, the Fairness Ordinance, a civil rights ordinance that made it illegal to discriminate against someone based on sexual orientation or gender identity, the first legislation of its kind in the state of Kentucky. While Saturday evening was a time to celebrate the success of the legislation, the people who fought for the protections all those years before also remember the hardships.
We were up against the power of hate and the power of denial, the power of rejection, the power of just wait, it's not your time.
Things that you and I take for granted, it actually wasn't easy back in those days. 20 years ago, you would be afraid to come out and say, hey, I'm going to a restaurant.
Dawn Wilson, now a Louisville Metro Human Relations Commissioner, was one of the members of the Fairness Campaign during the 90s when the group was pushing for the Fairness Ordinance. As a trans person, Wilson was very familiar with the challenges faced as a member of the LGBTQ community.
It was scary because I was putting myself out in front of people who didn't know me, and it would make a judgment call. Do I want this person? Is this person a quote-unquote freak?
In the 20 years since, Wilson says things have vastly improved, but there is still a lot of work to be done. She hopes the work she and others who fought for the Fairness Ordinance can help pave the way for others, making their road a little less rocky. Wilson says while there are fairness ordinances in several cities in Kentucky, protections do need to be solidified across the state, which is something the Fairness Campaign continues to work on throughout Kentucky. Dennis Ting, 11 at 11.